Thank you for that really nice song. Fits well with where I think we're going. A number of years before fob entry into cars, the key broke off in the driver's door of our Mazda. And mechanics couldn't seem to get it out very easily. So for years, we ended up having to reach over the passenger side to unlock it. And every once in a while, I tried using a knife to pry the broken part out. And on the last try, I didn't get the part out, but I accidentally turned the knife, and to my surprise, the lock popped up. And I turned the knife and locked and unlocked the door several times, and after all those years, anything we stuck in the keyhole would have worked. And I laughed so hard at the irony that our dog came out to check on me. Doors guard thresholds. We open them or seek to in order to move from one space to another. And when successful, we can pass through a threshold out of the old and into the new. Thresholds border to places. In theology speak, thresholds to the sacred are often referred to as liminal actions or events, often open metaphoric doors to them. And our lesson is about a liminal time, the transition from one prophet to another, from Elijah to Elisha. And as we heard, the story begins with a strange sort of follow the leader game where Elijah hurriedly goes places and says, don't follow, but Elisha ignores him and follows anyway. Elijah and Elisha and the onlooking prophets lack the key knowledge or awareness to enter and go through the next phase. And this reminded me of the unnecessary longer route to entering our vehicle before we had the knowledge, the awareness about how to get through the driver's side. Many times, lack of awareness in life causes roundabout routes to a new place. But once we acquire the necessary knowledge or awareness, it can act like a key and get us into and through thresholds. It can help us move from one place to the next. And it need not be an idea or words. Awareness through the sense of something can also be a key to unlocking and entering through the spiritual threshold. Worship or just service efforts to provide knowledge and awareness come to mind. We know in a traditional sense the sacred is here, that God is everywhere all the time. Worship has a multi-sensory set of keys meant to help people in different mindsets with different needs in this hour to unlock awareness that God is here with us. Pieces of worship try to offer thresholds and keys to better experience God. This is meant to be a liminal time and place. And we call it a holy place because of the access to the sacred, but forgive the pun, we can also call it a holy place, the poorest type of holy, because it can and very often does open up spots in the wall or the veil that we keep between us and that which is sacred. When the holes open, they let experiences of God pour through. And many humans try and move into times and places and awareness to access the sacred, what we call God. This is meant to be such a time and place. But if God is already here, if, as Paul claims, we actually live and we move and we have our being in God, then we are actually speaking not of a threshold to God, but a threshold to awareness of God. Because God's right here, right now, always. In worship, we're trying to focus on, become better aware of, and connect with that awesome omnipresence. We're trying to open up holes, portals in our lives to be aware of the holy. Now, prophets in our lesson today are not in a church, but the same sort of thing seems to be going on. They're all in search of access to parts of God. They want to pry open portals to peer in upon the holy. A lot of questions, seeking knowledge seem to be on their mind. What's God got planned When's it going to happen? Who's it going to involve? How can we find out? Can Elijah influence it? Does he know? Does Elisha know? Will God provide him with the same powers as Elijah? Will Elisha inherit the mantle of Elijah's position as master, as the lead prophet? Will he be able to do as Elijah has done? In times of anxiousness, people of faith tend to ask the same sort of questions. What, when, how, who? We want to know. And so we make educated and uneducated guesses. What's God up to? Or where is God in all of the messiness and chaos of life? We even want to hurry up the answers and know the unknown or even the absolute unknowable. And we can hear all of that going on in the lesson that Tony read so nicely. Chaos is afoot. Elijah and Elisha are doing some of the follow the leader to God thing. They're doing some sort of thing. And everyone seems to know Elisha is leaving, but no one seems sad about it. Instead, there's a callous talk about who will be in charge when he goes. And the prophets in the town seem to be playing a game of 20 questions, and there's all this hurly-burly in the story. Elisha seeks silence. Silence is time-tested as a key to the holy. Elisha is someone that people seem to think of as a pawn, but I like to think of him as the disciplined one, a spirit person, a prophet who proves his mettle and worth by his loyalty and humbleness for sure, but also, even as he wants to know, he's pretty patient about waiting to acquire knowledge. Elisha's willing to follow God's lead wherever it goes. And he finds silence helps. Another key to theological threshold is knowledge, awareness, even if sometimes it's just knowledge or awareness that we have to be patient and follow God for knowledge to be acquired. Silence, time to listen, can open up doors to knowledge and the sacred. And I mentioned before that bodies of water in the ancient Near East represent chaos. Rivers and seas were seen, like much of life, as uncontrollable. And so Bible stories often have important leaders go through water in ways that symbolize God's control over it and God's ability to lead willing humans to the other side of it, to the promised land. God controls chaos as Moses willingly leads the Hebrews out of Egypt and into the wilderness through the parted sea. And Moses' staff symbolizes God's presence in that story. And 40 years later, God again controls chaos as Joshua willingly leads the Hebrews out of the wilderness and into the promised land through the parted Jordan River. And with him was the Ark of the Covenant, symbolizing God's presence in that story. And our story today echoes those two partings of the water. God controls chaos as Elijah goes out of the promised land and into the wilderness through the parted Jordan. His mantle symbolizes God's presence. And we're told in the next verses, verse 13 and 14 from what Tony read, that Elijah, quote, picked up the mantle of Elijah that had fallen from him and went back and stood on the bank of the Jordan. He took the mantle of Elijah that had fallen from him and struck the water. He said, "Where is the Lord, the God of Elijah? Where is he?" And he struck the water again, and the water was parted to the one side and to the other, and Elijah crossed over. So God controls chaos again as Elisha crosses out of the wilderness back into the promised land. And he does so parting the Jordan with the very same mantle. Elijah picks up where Elijah left off. The mantle is passed on, and the threshold to new leadership is crossed. But before there's chaos, long, winding, almost whimsical seeming travel, questions, wondering, the unknown and the unknowable, and a repeated quest for silence, space in time to listen while all that's going on. And you probably noticed the curious request by Elisha that he get a double share of Elijah's spirit With other prophets looking on, Elijah asks Elisha what he can do for him. And Elisha wants him to give him the lion's share of ministry. Basically, in ancient times, he's heard asking for the eldest son's share of an estate, including inheriting the position of the patriarch in the family of prophets. Elijah counsels it's not his to give, but will be given by a sign from God, in an event symbolizing God's presence, an event that creates the liminal space, the changing of prophetic leadership. And sure enough, a spectacular event happens that indicates God's presence. A chariot of fire and horses of fire separate them, and Elijah is taken up to heaven in the whirlwind that those magnificent heavenly vehicles create. Elisha's left down on earth with that vision and the mantle, the symbol of God's presence. This is a very spiritual and religious event, what's called a theophany, an experience of God's presence, which is incomprehensible fire and swirling winds, a great power that caused Elijah to be lifted up and blown away by what we can hear as the cosmic spiritual breath of God. And the story has Elijah, like Moses, depart God's people in the wilderness, leaving no known burial site. And like Moses' successor, Joshua, Elijah's successor, Elisha, also parts the Jordan to get from the wilderness into the promised land. And so with the mighty breath of God's Spirit, Elisha is transfigured into the patriarch of the prophets. He literally takes up the mantle of Elijah and leads God's people. In the invocation, instead of a psalm this week, I read a part of the Jesus transfiguration story from Mark. Transfiguration is about a radical change in a spiritual state. Elisha becomes the anointed prophet. Jesus becomes the anointed Messiah. And both the Mark story and our lesson in 2 Kings are about men, Elisha and Jesus, taking on the radical change of being spiritual leaders, a prophet and a Messiah. And the crowd of prophets in 2 Kings and the 3 disciples in Mark represent all of us who make things more complicated by trying to figure it out in our own way instead of following God's lead and trusting God to sort it out in God's way. The prophets in towns and 2 Kings and the disciples in Mark ask questions and supply guesses, but silence and waiting and listening is what's needed. Which is why Elijah says, be silent in 2 Kings, and God says, listen in Mark. Yes, I've been suggesting a key to threshold of God is taking our time to be silent and listening to the past and the present, and God in them both can lead us through thresholds to the holy now and in the future. And that's one of the main reasons we've been listening to history sermons and history moments and praying about our present and future as we begin our revitalization efforts. And we need to remember that when we turn a key and cross the threshold to the holy often appears in ways humans don't expect, maybe even don't want. As we heard, God comes in the extraordinary, spiritually fiery wilderness whirlwinds and transfiguring mountaintop experiences. The holy may not be what we want or expect. It's often unexpected. Fiery chariots of God. Fiery chariots. God-soaked fogs. The extraordinary in ordinary places are telltale signs we've turned the key and popped the lock and entered into God's presence. A presence that can wow and awe us with wonder and love and even lead us off the wilderness, out of the wilderness and off mountains through chaos if we follow God's lead on God's way. Opening the threshold to the holy results in heavenly ways being exposed. And that's not to say it's always going to be wind and fire and foggy clouds, but mostly, almost always, God's sensed, shown to be present in experiences of the ordinary as extraordinary. That's the point. Ordinary earthbound existence transfigured into extraordinary experiences is the result of finding a key to the threshold that lets us step into heaven on earth, God's presence, to be a part of heaven on earth, to be experiencing God's presence. The music and prayers and silence and even the sermons we have in worship are meant to help create such experiences, to act as keys to bring us to thresholds of heaven's presence on earth. And sometimes we sense it right here in this space. Sometimes it's on the way home. Sometimes it's even later. To better the chances of sensing God, we have to let go of seeing the ordinary and let our minds be silent and listen to heaven's extraordinary presence. And that can be hard to do in the swirling chaos of our lives. But a part of worship service is to help us step away from that chaos, to have a place to silence our chattering minds, let go of ordinary earthly ways of thinking, and listen. And when we let go, if we let go, just let ourselves be open to the foggy mist soaking us, or the fiery whirlwind breath of God in our presence, or follow the prophets of God, or Jesus himself. That openness can help us turn keys to the threshold, to the holy, and make the ordinary extraordinary. May we all step away from chaos and find places that can silence our chattering minds and let go of ordinary earthly ways of thinking. And listen. Listen. May we all find the extraordinary in the ordinary as often as we can.